strengthening our civic authorities for the task that they must do. We criticise them, and rightly, but sometimes we forget to love them. And yet they depend greatly upon knowing that people are working with them so that they can do the work that God has called them to do. The Queen understands this and invites us to join that process. The ceremonies you have seen today are ancient, and some of their origins are veiled in the mists of the past, but their spirit and their meaning shine through the ages, never perhaps more brightly than now. It's the Westminster Abbey, the minster in the west. Minster is the same element that you get in the word monastery, which is a place where throughout history men and women have gathered together for Christian prayer, reflection, worship, study, to give us medicine, science, education, philosophy, technology, the minster in the west. I have in sincerity pledged myself to your service, as so many of you are pledged to mine. Here's that social covenant. Now, contract is different to a covenant, because a contract is based upon fault, whereas a covenant is based upon a promise. Very different concepts. We roll the two into one sometimes, very mischievously, but they're very different. A contract is based upon fault. I contract you to build this house for me, and if you don't get it right, I will sue you. That's a contract, and quite properly so. But a covenant goes beyond that. A covenant relates to what I promise to do to you, regardless of what you do back. That's why marriage is not only a contract, but it's also a covenant. And while it's appropriate that we fix in law certain elements of marriage, as we do with the building of a house, there's much more to it in marriage. We need to go beyond contract to covenant to make the marriage work, or parenthood for that matter, but similarly monarchy. In fact, similarly all of our social institutions. We need to go beyond black letter law to think about the application also of grace. And so our Queen is here promising to serve us. And we may or may not serve her back. She hopes that we will. But even if we don't, she will serve us. That's the difference between contract and covenant, which is why I'm using this phrase, social covenant, which I commit to you. So, I have in sincerity pledged myself to your service, as so many of you are pledged to mine. Throughout all my life, and with all my heart, I shall strive to be worthy of your trust. This notion of lifelong service, it's foreign to our culture now, that people used to work lifelong for a particular organisation, job for life. We'll look after you and you'll look after us. Stick with the same person for life. Stick with the same church for life, the same service club, the same football team, dare I say it. That one we still perhaps understand. Here's a picture of the postage stamp commemorating the coronation. The postage, we used to refer to it as Her Majesty's postage. We used to have the ER, Elizabeth Regina cipher, on all our letterboxes, just to remind one another. I remember near where I live a few years ago, people were trying to put their letters in the letterbox and they couldn't go in because the thing was overflowing, because the post officer had been collecting the things. He was forgetting to serve the community. He was forgetting to deliver Her Majesty's post. And government correspondence, some of you will remember this, used to have that in red letters, OHMS, on Her Majesty's service. Now that's a reminder to both sender and recipient. We're sending this out. This is serious stuff. Receiving that, we're not going to just throw this into the pile of the junk mail. This is serious stuff. We've lost all of this. Portraits of the Queen in our council chambers and other places of deliberation, commencing with prayer. It's gone. But if we remove portraits of the Queen, we remove prayers for God's blessing to be upon the deliberations, all we're left with is the agenda, as though we can manage the various problems of society without grace, without discretion, without service and long-suffering. So she continues, in this resolve I have my husband to support me. He shares all my ideals and all my affection for you. So she's speaking of the virtue of marriage in this process. Although my experience is so short and my task so new, I have in my parents and grandparents an example which I can follow with certainty and confidence, this notion of the transmission of the wisdom of the ages. We need to recover. There is also this: I have behind me not only the splendid traditions and the annals of more than 1,000 years, but the living strength and majesty of the Commonwealth and Empire, of societies old and new, of lands and races different in histories and origins, but all by God's will united in spirit and aim. Inspecting the troops in Papua New Guinea, which is one of the most recent acquisitions of the Crown. Under Gough Whitlam, Papua New Guinea was given its independence as a new nation. It was supposed to be a republic. That's the presumption that the people of Papua New Guinea would want to be a republic. When the dear folk of Papua New Guinea found out that they were about to become a republic, they hit the roof. "Don't take Mrs. Quinn from us," they said. And so the Queen was asked by the Whitlam government, would she please accept the crown of Papua New Guinea? Of course, delighted to. Therefore, I am sure that this, my coronation, is not the symbol of power and a splendour that are gone, but a declaration of our hopes for the future, and for the years I may, by God's mercy, be given to reign and serve you as your Queen. Commemorative coin. I've been speaking of the vast regions and the varied peoples to whom I owe my duty, but there have also sprung from my island home a theme of social and political thought that constitutes our message to the world, and through the changing generations has found acceptance both within and far beyond my realms. Parliamentary institutions with their free speech and their respect for the rights of minorities, and the inspiration of a broad tolerance in thought and its expression. All this we conceive to be a precious part of the way of life and outlook. Here she is visiting our Parliament House in Canberra. During recent centuries, this message has been sustained and invigorated by the immense contribution in language, literature and action of the nations of our Commonwealth overseas. It gives expression, as pray it always will, to living principles sacred to the Crown and to the monarchy, as to its many participants and peoples. I ask you now to cherish them and practice them too. Then we can go forward together in peace, seeking justice and freedom for all men. Our Queen doesn't ask too much of us, but this is one thing she does ask, that we cherish all that she stands for. We need to work in partnership with her so that she can do her work and we can do ours together, one enriching the other. Here's Her Majesty congratulating Trooper Mark Donaldson, VC. As this day draws to a close, I know that my abiding memory of it will be not only the solemnity and beauty, but the inspiration of your loyalty and affection. We inspire the monarch through those expressions, as we saw in the video yesterday, those expressions of loyalty to her. But not just the monarch. What about the Governor-General? What about the governors? What about our police? All of whom, by the way, bear the Edward crown on both shoulders, on which is the cross of Christ. Next time you're breath tested, you might want to point this out and perhaps say, God bless you and God be with you in the work that you do as you carry around the cross of Christ on both shoulders. They might ask you to have another puff into the testing equipment, perhaps. But the police, by the way, were founded by Christians in 1829. We've lost a theology of policing. We've turned those agents of social enrichment as they were created, we've turned them into warriors because we've lost a theology of community policing. There's so much restoration needed. I sometimes wish I had 1,000 lifetimes. The inspiration of your loyalty and affection. Can we learn to love the civic authorities, love the police, love our judges, our magistrates. I thank you all from a full heart. God bless you all. The final handout to draw attention to is some free money. Just don't try and spend this, you'll get us all in trouble. The $5 note, as our lowest value piece of currency, bears the image of the monarch. That's the tradition. So I have reflected on this so that as we go about contracting one with another, and the exchange of money as a contract, although it's also a promise, which is a type of covenant. As we exchange the money, we have an opportunity to promote the Crown. Especially those of you perhaps who have young children or grandchildren and might be handing over a $5 bill so that your grandchildren or young children might go to the Royal Sydney Show or something. As you hand it over, just don't let go for a moment. Now, don't worry, you won't rip it, especially if it's a real one, because the polymer notes are practically indestructible. But as you hand it over, you might ask that question which our Lord in fact asked about money: whose name and whose portrait is featured. And they can answer the question before you perhaps hand over. But I'm old enough to remember when our money in Britain certainly used to say, and I'm not sure if it still does, Philip, you might know, but traditionally the money would say, "I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £1. So in fact our money is a promise. Although we use it for contractual purposes, there's still covenant involved. So with those remarks, I commend this notion of social covenant to you, and all of what the Queen stands for, and I've sketched something of all of what the Queen stands for in this little handout, beginning in fact with reference to that wonderful broadcast which she made at the tender age of only 14, and it was the 70th anniversary of this on the 13th of October, by design or by God's economy, that was delivered on the feast of Edward the Confessor. We've been mentioning his crown over dinner. Sue's bearing it on her lovely little badge. Go and see it afterwards. But at the age of 14, she spoke she spoke words to encourage anxious and displaced children during the Second World War, when it looked like all was lost, and gave hope. And then at the age of 21 said, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." And then the final quote from Her Majesty is, following the defeat of that wretched referendum, and because there was that uncertainty about how we wished to proceed, and the uncertainty had been clarified, at that point the Queen very graciously re-pledged her commitment. And she says there, "I shall continue faithfully to serve as Queen of Australia under the Constitution to the very best of my ability." Well, God bless the Queen on this glorious day.
Here.